Tangentially, repositioning culture is not just an expression, but a proposition. When investigated, they prove to be well founded within reason, since literally and figuratively speaking, the said culture can be repositioned through us. Because of the veracity of the aforementioned declaration, from my field of view as a media arts specialist, author, licensed cultural practitioner, student of film, and a publisher, acceding to the view that global citizens metaphorically are conduits expressing repositioning culture as a visual theme or telling a story, since we global citizens have an insatiable craving for communication. In this frame, the genesis of this preposition is grounded in diverse ideologies, human behavior, and theories, but specifically our logical thought that sets the stage on one hand. Conversely, on the other hand, creating the tone and the tenor which explains the relationship between attitudes and behaviors of global citizens who determine repositioning culture. Repositioning culture is not a myth, because myths are specific accounts of gods or superhuman beings involved in extraordinary events or circumstances in a time that is unspecified, but which is understood as existing apart from ordinary human experience. The term mythology denotes both the study of myth and the body of myths belonging to a particular religious tradition. Further to this, I am mindful that there is a plurality component of this thesis, since it seemingly has characteristics like a language that is consistently providing clarity for its meaning as it set out the laws, rules, and principles on how this theory should be governed. The most interesting aspect of this discourse is the navigational process, because it sets in motion a consciousness which activated the contours of my thinking intellectually. This consciousness also empowered me to categorize, evaluate, substantiate, and unearth data, which prepared me to demystify this thesis with data from the annals of history. A word of caution though, we must be conscious of the fact that it is natural in this frame for writers to disagree with this thesis, repositioning culture, just like writers who disagree with the assertion that Carnival is a festival that evolved from ancient celebration. Logically, on the other hand, this line of thinking is supported by some global citizens because it is natural for them to make sense of our world, which is based upon, on, or set of core beliefs, since our minds are constantly trying to make sense of our world, forming judgments and opinions about every situation, event, and interaction. Consequently to these series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve the particular narrative, which makes it much easier to understand and see, I am cognizant that there are other views presented by other global citizens despite their ethnicity, but specifically the view which I wish to underscore here in this frame is the one which has a larger cultural footprint. It becomes a part of culture, and most importantly, it is left behind by its initiators for those following. In light of this admission, then free thought is introduced in the conversation because it holds that global citizens should not accept ideas proposed as true without recourse to knowledge, and reason gives traction to repositioning culture, becomes the cultural ethos and a platform to launch and examine the intellectual magnitude of this theory. In this frame, there's a predicate which showcases how global citizens behave, since culture can be repositioned and will influence their pre-existing attitudes and behavioral intentions. In this scheme of things, the thought must be underscored that global culture can be repositioned, especially since it resonates just as a reconstruction of the cultural concept of a society. What is also uniquely interesting about this narrative, the more that I drill down into this subject through research information from a plethora of other sources, I have brought to the surface the fact that there is the soul of culture, which is affiliated with human behavior, which also varies from culture to culture and from time period to time period, because soul is seemingly connected with that of mind, which has to do with consciousness and intellect of the individual, especially when analyzing if culture can be repositioned. Ostensibly, the conceptual framework of my doctrine in this frame is conducive to the central theme of this discourse, in view of the fact repositioning culture has to do with how we interpret and decode the same, which also has to do with the fact that we think and act differently as global citizens. For example, it should be noted that all global citizens have the capacity to research these situations, events, in different ways and may interpret what other people say and do according to our own set of past experiences, culture, faith, values, and all or some could help us form our beliefs about ourselves, about others, and about the world in general. It is because of this reason and seeking further clarity of this subject that the Cambridge Dictionary definition of reconstruction and repositioning was introduced, because they added clarity and value to this discourse. These previously mentioned interpretations provided an intellectual cultural platform for me to analyze repositioning culture, since it is just a reconstruction of the cultural concept of a society. It should be noted that this conversation was ventilated within the corridors of civilization, since there is a perception that we are looking at the world through a distorted or colored lens, and everyone has their own personal prescription of color for their glasses. The glasses were manipulated as a metaphor because in this frame, glasses are a pretext to draw your attention to culture. Kim Ann Zimmerman addresses the issue of culture, since it is the characteristic and knowledge of a particular group of people encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. Further, all things being equal, in all plausibility, Zimmerman's description of culture synchronized well with the concept repositioning of culture, because the same is just a reconstruction of the cultural concept of a society, which is also part of culture. Culture is considered a central concept in anthropology, encompassing the range of phenomena that are transmitted through social learning in human society. Cultural universals are found in all human societies. These include expression forms like art, music, dance, ritual, religion, and technologies like tool usage, cooking, shelter, and clothing. Despite all of the views and reasons ventilated, they are akin to repositioning culture and were deconstructed and examined through the lens of a cultural practitioner. The cultural practitioner's behavior in this frame, to some extent, mimics the cinematographer, whose responsibility is the capturing of photographic images in space through the use of a number of controllable elements. These include the quality of the film stock, the manipulation of the camera lens, framing, scale, and movement. The more that global citizens act as conduits in this frame is intended to imply that such a way may have a deep effect, especially on this thesis, repositioning culture, which is a way of life. This thesis, repositioning culture, behaves like data because it can be measured, collected, and reported and analyzed, whereupon the said theory can be visualized using graphs, images, or other probing tools, which create space to theorize abstract information. Correspondingly, despite all of the information, cultures are merely different, not deficient, and each culture norms and practices should be assessed only from the perspective of the culture itself, not by standards embraced by another culture is contextualized. In the scheme of things, repositioning culture is not to be confused with the overlapping rhetoric of borders, but a theory that is still embedded in the belief that things have a set of characteristics which make them underscore culture. Completely, just where all the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement of culture ends, as opposed to repositioning culture that crosses a differing ideology border, creates the ethos for the cultural footprints that we leave behind as a conversation, especially under the semblance of culture. Overall, just to reaffirm my position through my lens as a media arts specialist, an author, a licensed cultural practitioner, student of film, and a publisher, I was better able to ventilate my view that global citizens, metaphorically, are conduits expressing repositioning culture as a visual team or telling a story, but we global citizens who have an insatiable craving for communicating.